Level 1. Negative $50. You didn't spend $50 you didn't have. You spent 12. A coffee, a subscription you forgot existed, gone before you even checked the app. The bank checked first. Overdraft fee, $38. Now you're negative 50 for a purchase that cost 12. You stare at the number like staring will shrink it. It doesn't. You call. The hold music loops twice before a voice reads a script back at you. Fees can't be reversed at this time. You hang up before you say something you'll have to apologize for later. You don't have anyone to spend it apologizing to. That's the part nobody tells you about negative $50. It's not the number that hurts. It's how alone you are inside it. You start doing math you never used to do. Not big math. Small, humiliating math. Can you get gas today, or does that wait until Friday? Is the fee going to hit before or after your check clears? You've become an accountant for numbers too small for anyone else to notice, and the only client is your own survival. You skip the thing you'd usually buy without thinking. A coffee, a lunch, a ride share when it's raining. Nobody sees you skip it. That's the point. Poverty at this level is invisible by design. You perform normal while doing arithmetic behind your own eyes. Your card declines at the register. Not because the money isn't coming, because it hasn't landed yet. You step aside. The line behind you doesn't say anything, but you feel it anyway. That specific shrinking that has nothing to do with the $10 and everything to do with being watched fail in public. You refresh the app twice standing in the same spot. The cashier waits. You apologize to nobody in particular. You go home and open a spreadsheet you made for exactly this. A column for what you owe, a column for what's coming in, a column that's supposed to say safe and instead says nothing at all. You've never been taught this math. Nobody sits you down and explains what an overdraft actually is before it happens to you the first time. You learn it the way you learn most things at this level, by getting hit with it and then reverse engineering the lesson afterward, alone, at a kitchen table that isn't fully paid for either. You think about calling your mother. You don't. Not because she wouldn't help. Because the conversation would cost you something the $50 never could. A version of yourself she'd have to see that you're not ready to let her see. So you sit with the number by yourself, the way you've learned to sit with most numbers by yourself. The first rule, at negative $50, the fee isn't a fee. It's a tax on already having nothing. Level 2, $3,000 in credit card debt. Not from anything reckless. A car repair here, a month where rent ate the whole check, a birthday you couldn't say no to. Nothing you'd call a mistake individually. Together they became a number that doesn't move no matter how much you send it. You pay $200 a month. The statement arrives and the balance barely flinches, because most of what you sent went to interest, not principal. You're paying to stand still. Nobody explained that to you. You had to find out by doing the math yourself at midnight with a calculator app open next to the statement. You start noticing the number everywhere, on the way to work doing math about a lunch you're skipping, at a friend's engagement party doing math about the gift you can't really afford, in bed at night doing the same math you did that morning, just quieter. It's not that the number is enormous, it's that it never leaves. $3,000 follows you the way a smaller number never did, because a smaller number resolves itself in a week, and this one just sits there, patient, collecting interest whether you're thinking about it or not. The card company calls it a limit increase and frames it like a reward. Congratulations, your limit is now $5,000. Nobody asks if you wanted more rope. They just hand it to you and wait. You don't use it, not because you're strong, because you're scared of what $3,000 already feels like and you don't want to learn what $5 feels like. Your friend mentions they just paid off their car. You say that's great. You don't mention your number. Debt at this level is quiet the same way poverty was quiet at negative 50. Nobody can see it on you. You just carry it everywhere, folded into every decision you make that looks unrelated to money but isn't. You start rehearsing conversations you never have. What you'd say if someone asked directly how much you owed. You practice a casual tone for a number that doesn't feel casual at all, the way you'd rehearse a joke you're not sure will land. Nobody ever actually asks. That's almost worse. You spend all that energy preparing for a question that never comes, because at $3,000 in debt, the silence around money is thick enough that nobody even risks the question. You open the app on a Sunday and do the thing you dread. You look at the actual math, minimum payments, current rate, years to pay off if nothing changes. The number the app gives you back is 11 years. 11 years to erase $3,000 because of how interest compounds against you instead of for you. You close the app. You don't tell anyone the number. The second rule, $3,000 in debt isn't a number. It's a sentence, and nobody read you your rights before it started. Level 3, $15,000. Student loans, mixed with a card you maxed during a year you don't like to talk about. The debt has a personality now. It has due dates you know by heart. An app you check the way other people check a bank balance they're proud of. You've stopped being surprised by the total. You've started being surprised by how normal it feels to owe this much and still function, still show up, still laugh at things. Your paycheck lands, and before you've spent $1 of it, half of it already belongs to somewhere else. Not rent, not groceries, the past. Money you spent or borrowed years ago is still eating the money you're earning today. You start describing your income in two categories without meaning to: what's mine and what's already spoken for. The second category keeps winning. A collector calls about an old medical bill you forgot existed. Not threatening, just persistent, the way water is persistent. You negotiate it down. You feel a small, strange pride in negotiating down a debt you shouldn't have had in the first place. That's what $15,000 does. It turns survival into an accomplishment. You get a raise, $4,000 a year. You feel it for exactly 1 week before it disappears into the same hole it was always going to disappear into. The debt doesn't care that you did better this year. The debt was already spent before you earned it. You start avoiding a specific kind of conversation, the one where someone asks what you'd do with an extra $500 a month, because the honest answer isn't a vacation or a hobby. It's simply less dread. You'd spend it on the absence of a feeling, not the presence of a thing. And that's a hard sentence to say out loud at a dinner table where everyone else is talking about upgrades. You smile and change the subject the way you're getting good at changing subjects. Late one night, you actually call the number on the back of the card, not to complain, to ask what happens if you just stop. The representative's voice doesn't change, doesn't judge, just explains collections, credit damage, years of consequence, delivered in the same flat tone as someone reading a weather report. You thank them and hang up and don't stop paying. You just needed to hear the floor before you decided not to fall through it. The third rule: at $15,000, you're not paying for the past. You're renting your present to it. Level 4, $40,000. The car loan stacked on top of everything else, because you needed reliable transportation, and reliable transportation costs exactly as much as unreliable transportation plus interest. You do the math you've been avoiding, total minimum payments across everything. It's more than your rent. You have a mortgage-sized bill for things that don't build equity, that don't appreciate, that evaporate the second you're done paying for them. You stop opening some of the apps, not out of denial, out of exhaustion. There's only so much dread a person can process before a certain kind of numbness sets in. And the numbness isn't peace, it's just a different kind of tired. Your coworker mentions they're debt-free, says it casually, the way people mention the weather. You laugh along and change the subject before your face does something you can't take back. $40,000 doesn't make you desperate. It makes you quiet in specific rooms. The interest math finally clicks for you at this level, the way it never clicked in school. You're not paying off $40,000. You're paying off $40,000 plus what $40,000 costs to borrow, which at your rates is closer to $55,000 over the life of the loans. $15,000 of pure air, gone to nothing, because you needed the money faster than you had it. You start keeping two versions of your financial life in your head at all times, the number your friends would guess if you asked them, and the real one, and the gap between those two numbers has become its own kind of weight you carry into every room. Somebody at work jokes about you're always having your coffee order ready, always looking put together, and you laugh because the joke is closer to true than they know. Looking fine costs nothing extra. It's the only thing at this level that's actually free. You research refinancing one weekend, spend 3 hours comparing offers that all promise to make things easier, and all quietly extend the timeline in exchange for the lower monthly number. You almost sign one. Then you do the total cost math instead of the monthly payment math, and you close the tab. Nobody taught you to look at the second number instead of the first. You had to learn to ask it yourself. The fourth rule: $40,000 isn't a debt. It's a second, invisible job you go to every night in your head. Level 5, $85,000, the mortgage now part of the stack, and something strange happens here that didn't happen at any level below it. People stop pitying you and start respecting the same math that used to make them wince. $85,000 said out loud sounds like a house. It sounds like an asset. Nobody asks about the interest rate. Nobody asks what the payment actually is relative to what you make. The number got bigger and somehow got more socially acceptable at the same time. You notice the bank talks to you differently now too. The rope gets handed out generously here. Pre-approved letters. Limit increases you didn't request. A relationship banker who knows your name calls to check in. Not because he's worried about you, because $85,000 in obligations means $85,000 in eventual interest, and the bank has done a version of the math you've been avoiding doing about yourself. You are not a risk to them anymore. You are a long-term asset with your name on it. You make the minimum on everything and call it responsible. It is responsible, technically. It's also permanent if nothing changes. You start doing the long math late at night, the kind you did at $3,000, except the number at the end is different now, 30 years. 30 years of this exact shape of obligation if the pattern holds. You close the laptop before you finish the thought. You have a dinner party at your house now, the kind you host instead of attend, and somebody compliments the kitchen you renovated with a line of credit you haven't fully told anyone about. You say thank you the way you're supposed to. Nobody asks what the renovation actually cost you long term, because at this level, asking that question is considered rude in a way it never was when you owed $3,000 on a card. Debt gets more private as it gets more respectable, which is its own strange rule nobody states out loud. You start comparing yourself to neighbors instead of old classmates now, a different scoreboard with the same losing math underneath it. Their car is newer, their vacation looked better in the pictures. You don't know what they owe to get there, and they don't know what you owe either, and that mutual not knowing is the entire economy this neighborhood runs on. The fifth rule, at $85,000, the debt stops looking like a mistake and starts looking like a lifestyle, which is a more comfortable way to be trapped, not a way out of being trapped. Level 6, $150,000, the mortgage grown, a home equity line added for a renovation that felt necessary at the time. And small debts you'd almost describe as forgotten, if forgotten meant anything other than deferred. The number stopped scaring you months ago. That's not peace either. That's what happens when a number gets big enough that your nervous system simply stops reacting to it the way it used to. You have equity now, on paper. Somebody at a dinner party calls you asset rich. You don't correct them, but the phrase sits strange in your chest, because asset rich and cash poor live in the same body at this level, and only one of those words shows up when someone's impressed by your house. You could sell tomorrow and walk away with something. You could also lose your job tomorrow and be 3 missed payments from losing all of it. Both of those sentences are true about the same person on the same day. You start talking to a financial advisor for the first time, not because you're wealthy, but because the math got complicated enough that you needed someone else to hold it with you. He doesn't flinch at your number, he's seen bigger. That, more than anything, tells you something about where you actually sit. Your sibling asks for a loan around this time, hearing about the house, the equity, assuming a number that isn't the real one. You say you'll think about it and spend that night doing math you haven't done in years, the actual liquid number versus the number people assume exists behind a house like yours. The gap between those two figures is the loneliest math you've done since -$50, because back then at least the number was honest about what it was. Now the number lies for you without you asking it to. You catch yourself explaining your finances defensively at a family gathering, unprompted, to people who never actually questioned you. Nobody asked. You just felt the need to account for a number that isn't visible to anyone but you and a spreadsheet. The sixth rule, $150,000 in debt, means you finally look successful to people who can't see the second half of your balance sheet. Level 7, $300,000, most of it the mortgage on a house that's actually worth more than you owe. And for the first time, the word leverage starts replacing the word debt in your own head. You didn't decide to reframe it. The bank did it for you first, and eventually you just adopted their language, because their language made the number easier to carry. You talk about interest rates at parties now the way you used to talk about the weather. You know your rate. You know when it resets. You've become fluent in a language you used to be terrified of. That fluency is its own kind of wealth, even though your actual net worth is still a modest, careful thing sitting quietly under a mountain of obligations you've learned to describe as strategic instead of desperate. You watch someone at the same party wince when they mention their own credit card balance. A number, a fraction of yours, and you feel something uncomfortable rise in you before you can stop it? A flicker of superiority you don't like about yourself. You were that person once. The only thing separating you from him is collateral and time, not character, not intelligence. End quote. And some nights you remember that clearly, and some nights the leverage language makes you forget it entirely. Your accountant tells you the debt is doing something for you now, tax-wise, structurally, in a way that debt never did at $15,000. Same word, different weight. Nobody explains that to people at the bottom. Debt is a trap when you're poor and a tool when you're not, and the only thing that changed between those two sentences is the collateral behind the number. You remember, briefly, the version of yourself who negotiated a medical bill down and felt proud of it. You almost laugh at how far that pride traveled to get here, to a room where an accountant uses the word leverage without irony, describing a number bigger than that old debt could have imagined being. You don't feel like the same person who did that math at midnight, but the spreadsheet habit never left you. You just apply it to bigger rooms now. A friend from years ago reaches out, someone who watched you struggle at 15,000, someone who has no idea what the number looks like now. They ask how you're doing with the careful tone people use when they still remember an old version of you. You say you're doing fine, and for once, it isn't a performance. The seventh rule, 300,000 in debt, means the debt finally started working for you instead of the other way around. And that flip is the entire secret nobody tells. Level 8, 1.2 million, spread across a mortgage on a second property, a business line of credit, and financing on things that generate more than they cost. You stopped thinking of this as debt months ago. You think of it as structure. The distinction matters more than it should, but it's the difference between panic and strategy, and you cross that line somewhere around level 6 without noticing exactly when. Your bank doesn't send you form letters anymore. A person calls. The person knows your name, your timeline, your goals, because managing your obligations well is now part of somebody's job description at that institution. You are, in a very real sense, worth managing, not because you're rich in the way people imagine rich, because your obligations are large enough and your assets are attached to them tightly enough that losing you as a client would cost somebody a bonus. You remember negative $50 sometimes, the way you'd remember a country you used to live in as a kid, familiar and foreign at once. You remember the $38 fee, the hold music, the specific shrinking feeling at the register. You wouldn't trade this version of debt back for that one, even though this number is thousands of times bigger, because the shape of it is completely different now. Somebody younger asks you for advice one afternoon, mentions their own credit card balance in a voice that sounds exactly like your voice used to sound at $15,000, apologetic, almost ashamed, waiting for judgment. You hear yourself the way you must have sounded back then and you don't laugh. You just tell them the thing you wish someone had told you, that the number isn't the story. The relationship to the number is the story, and that took you a decade and 7 figures to actually believe. You don't tell them the part that still feels true even now, that some nights the old fear still visits, quieter, dressed differently, but present, because a decade of practice doesn't erase where you started. It just teaches you to hold it without flinching where anyone can see. You sign papers for a new acquisition, another million added to the structure, and you don't feel the fear you felt signing your first lease at 15,000 in debt. The fear is still there somewhere. You're sure of it, just quieter, priced in, absorbed into a version of you built to hold heavier things without visibly shaking. The 8th rule, at 1.2 million, the debt stops being a burden and becomes a job title. Level 9, 8 figures, spread across leveraged real estate, business financing, and instruments most people have never heard of and will never need to. You don't check the total balance the way you used to check your bank account at negative 50. You check the ratios, debt to asset, debt to income. The numbers that matter now aren't the raw figures. They're the relationships between figures, and you have people whose entire job is watching those relationships, so you don't have to. Somebody asks if you're worried about all the debt you're carrying, meaning it kindly, the way you'd ask someone about a health scare. You almost laugh, not because the question is stupid, because it's the exact question you used to ask yourself at 3 in the morning at $15,000, except the answer used to keep you up, and now it doesn't even register as a real question. The debt was never the danger. The relationship to the debt was. You think, sometimes, about the version of you at negative $50, the one who apologized to nobody in particular at a register while a line waited behind him. That person would not recognize this room, this math, these people whose entire job is managing numbers this large. And yet you understand something now that person didn't, that the shrinking feeling at the register was never really about the $50. It was about not having anyone whose job it was to catch you. Now you have several. The difference between negative 50 and 8 figures was never really about the number. It was about who was standing behind you when it moved. You think about the man who asked you for advice, the one whose voice sounded like your voice at 15,000. You wonder if he'll take a decade to get where you are, or longer, or never, and you realize the number was never really the variable that mattered. What mattered was whether anyone ever sat him down and told him the truth you had to learn alone. That debt doesn't change what it is as it grows. It only changes who's willing to carry it with you. Somewhere right now, someone is staring at a screen with a minus sign on it. $38 just left an account that had $12 too little to begin with. They're doing math too small for anyone else to see, holding a phone against their ear, listening to hold music loop for the 3rd time. They think the number is the problem. It's not. The problem was never the number. It was whether the number was working for them or against them. And at negative $50, everything is against you by design. The ninth rule: the debt doesn't change as it grows. What changes is who it answers to.